Good. We will, thank you everyone for joining us. We'll jump right into it because we wanted to read some sections and then have a chance for just a little bit of self-reflection before before Ed joins us. I wanted everyone to, we're staying on the topic of the 4 C's, and we wanted to bring out the relevant sections in the book. If everyone has a book, they can flip to 127, the section on alternative governments for the current age. And I'm happy if someone wanted to take the opportunity to read.
Hey, Rick, my book says dealing with deviance on 127.
Okay, so you know what,
the
the section was a little bit reformatted, maybe in the newer edition. So do you want to, I can tell you if you look in the table of contents, it's going to be in part 2, the servant leadership, past and present. And the section is basically maybe the 6th section down, alternative governments. If you see for the current age.
I see it here. It's
Perfect.
on page 70, actually.
Got it. Yeah, I know they moved things around.
On Kindle, it's page 124.
All right, good. We'll need all of these page updates. So if someone wants to go ahead and read, that would be great.
I'll read, Rick, in since I found it on page 70 here. Alternate governments for the current age. As we look at contemporary institutions, both secular and spiritual, particularly in light of a divine monarchy, we wonder what changes can be made in our leadership structure to make society more functional. Given that there are no longer any divine monarchs, can we say that democracy really provides the common ground by which people can choose their rulers? Are there alternatives to democracy? One alternative is a rotating monarchy. Some spiritual and secular groups may be more comfortable with a leader who has monarch-like power within their organization, but who maintains such a position only temporarily. In this scenario, a leader is elected and serves his term. Another alternative would be to have the responsibilities of the leadership job clearly defined. Then a leader could be given more power than in the average democratic position, but would be able to maintain that power only if he fulfilled the necessary requirements. These requirements will be presented by a nonpartisan board of elders, trustees, etc. Oligarchy is another option. An oligarchy is a group of semi-monarch or the established elite who choose a monarch or an executive board from among their own group to serve for a set period of time. That monarch and group function under clearly defined guidelines. The oligarchic group would determine the length of the ruler's term. The reason that these alternatives would be better than a typical democracy is that these models respect sacred hierarchy. Of course, they only work if the leader is trained and works as a servant leader, endowed with the 10 servant leadership qualities we have previously discussed. Such people are more likely to allow those who possess more wisdom to lead. Modern day organizations, both secular and spiritual, lack real leaders. Real leaders cannot be tied down to board meetings where they are forced to make decisions that best pave the way toward their re-election or where partisan interests overly influence them. These alternative systems, however, give a leader the genuine power to see that the citizens are being cared for. The highest aspect of spiritual or material management is not possible without drawing in some way on the managerial style of a divine monarch. As a leader comes closer to becoming a divine monarch, he not only has more power, but more ability to empower, enliven, protect, and care for others. The closer a leader comes to becoming a divine monarch, a true servant leader, the more we will see the 4 C's, character, competence, compassion, and courage, manifest in his personality. We would see this leader continually discovering truths and presenting values based on that truth. If, however, servant leaders cannot be created, then some will say that democracy is perhaps the best system, for they feel that at least in a democracy, the people can feel responsible for their collective successes or failures. However, that conclusion is questionable. Some say the oligarchic system of shared and monitored monarchy is dangerous. For oligarchies, can become poisoned by the desire for power, both individually and collectively. We have all heard the maxim, power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely. So there is always a chance that by increasing a leader's power, we are also increasing the chance that he will become corrupt. This obviously will happen unless the servant leader sees himself as a steward. He must see that power has come to him to be the caretaker and not the owner. We also know there can be flaws in those who monitor him, for there must always be systems to help monitors, reminding the servant leader of his responsibilities. Such a monitoring board can be composed of elders, trustees, scholars, and saints, with the major influence coming from the guidance and monitoring of detached religious leaders who are spiritual consultants and who understand the genuine needs of the citizens. In a healthy family, the management of the household is accomplished by the shared power of the mother and father, who often have distinct roles of dominance and control over the children and the various family issues. Although this is a natural and workable arrangement, it can still be abused. In such a situation, there are also various monitors and advisors, elders, community leaders, social workers, the legal system, etc., meant to help the family leaders and, if necessary, bring them back in line. All systems are efficient in different ways, but some are more problematic than others. This is the duality inherent in human nature. We are prone to become illusioned and make mistakes. We have imperfect senses and the propensity to cheat others. Although these qualities exist, we still need to coordinate, facilitate, and manage our lives. We need leaders. The main question is, despite what can and does go wrong, how can we minimize the difficulties and maximize the chances to bring about the highest good for the greatest number of people? Wow.
Thank you. Just wanted to take any thoughts or reflections on this section. Anything that stood out, anything that particularly resonated?
I just wonder how this can happen, you know? I mean, it's all laid out there. It's all, yeah.
Yeah,
But in the macro level, I just don't know how it can happen. And in smaller pockets, yes, but I don't know.
one of the things that I was thinking of, one of the, at least to me, one of the kind of most important parts in this section was, and it speaks to your question, Stacy, was this system of having a checking system or people who are overseeing the leaders. And I think immediately if we bring in people, like they said, elders, trustees, scholars, saints, again, people, and I thought one of the key terms that they put in here, detached, right? The people who are necessarily detached.
Wanna check the chat box, man. I'm so sorry. I was off mute.
Sorry, that's okay. I was just saying that those that are detached from the outcomes. And I think that's really, really key for anyone in kind of a more of a monitoring or advisory role, because a lot of times leaders will necessarily, the people that they'll have oversee them are the people that already agree with what they do, or they may already have, there's a friendship, or there's people who've already bought into necessarily what they're already doing or how they behave. And I think this point here is really, to me, one of the keys of probably what's breaking down in the current way of leadership, is that there's no strong system of accountability and monitoring or checking. Did anyone have any other thoughts or comments on this?
Rick, and I just wanted to say, I think the paragraph that talks about how modern day organizations lack real leaders. It's a big point that I think is, if we just put it out there as it stands alone, could gather so many triggers and reactions. And it's such a good one to reflect on, because it actually talks about, in addition to what you've shared and what Stacy had just read, and also shared her reflections on that, which is how I see it is, how do you become purpose-centric rather than self-centric? And the more purpose-centric we become, then the ability to influence using the 4 C's is a whole different play too. I think how we understand leadership in this day and age where it's such a, I would say, sexy title, you want to be associated with that label in some shape or form. But I feel so much of it is to fulfill on some lacking self-worth, rather than really understanding once you step into or rise into that accountability, how is the primary and fundamental purpose empowerment of humanity. And thus the term servant leader is so apt for that type of leadership, and perhaps the only type of leadership that there should be out there, or not should be, that as human beings we can aspire to work towards.
Yeah, I agree. And speaking to the point that you were making about this paragraph, when B.T. Swami is referring to real leaders, it basically requires that those that are, buying into leadership, that they actually respect and buy into the position of a servant leader. Some people may look at that type of leadership and say, that's not for me. And so I think it's really important that when we keep bringing up this term leader in this book, it's referring to a specific type of leader that continuously will get us, are trying to align the readers with. And so I think that's really the first point here is, in this term servant leader, it's gonna come up again and again over the book, because that's the thrust of this book. And, as he was saying at the beginning, the ideal, this was more in the beginning of the book, and Ed has mentioned this concept of divine monarchy, having this concept of there being a higher power involved in our rulership, and that, we are still accountable to someone. I'll share something that was really powerful. Has anyone seen there was a recent series, it was on Queen Elizabeth. It was on Netflix. Can everyone remember what the
Crown?
name? Yeah, The Crown.
Yeah.
So there was a really, and if people haven't seen it, it's really well done. But there was a part in the, in the series that I caught. I haven't watched so much of it, but the Queen specifically says when there's a huge conflict that's happening, and there is, she has to make a decision over pleasing the people and doing what the majority want. And she specifically tells her advisors at that time, I am not accountable to the people. I'm in fact accountable to God. And that was, I thought, a very powerful statement that she made, because how many leaders do we know are in fact putting that out there as, a priority, right? And so it just spoke to me the type of leader and, person that she wants to be. And I was really, it was really uplifting to see that type of person make a difficult decision that wasn't necessarily going to maybe be the popular decision. So that was, if people haven't seen that, it's really powerful documentary or series show to see. So thank you. Anyone else? Stacy?
So when I was trying to figure out page 127, I instead started toward the beginning instead. And what I was just reading before we came, which really dovetails with this, is it talks about how about the masses of people and the faultiness with democracy is, people will vote, but that the majority who vote don't necessarily vote what's the right thing. Right. Like it said, well, like a bunch of kindergartners could vote not to go to school. Right. But just because the majority voted doesn't necessarily mean that that's the right thing. Right. And so, a couple of the things it says Voltaire surmised that because the masses are willingly subordinate, they tend to follow fads and whatever society deems normal at any given time. So there's a couple of really good, it's actually on my page too, just right in the beginning at part 1, but it's talking about, the faultiness of democracy. Another place on page 3, it says democracy has been referred to as demon crazy. That is because there is an inherent and essential flaw in its methods. Reality is not dictated by majority vote. That is simply because the majority agree on a particular course of action does not mean make that action the proper way to go.
Nice. So just
So-
because a mass of people are getting behind something doesn't make it the right thing.
Yeah, it's just what you said, right? Because people, they don't have the right motives, or they, just they don't have the confidence to really have their own opinions, so they follow whoever advertised the most, or whatever they were influenced by.
Mhm. Thank you, Stacy. Marius.
Hello, I have some thoughts. I remember one conference that most of us attended to with Robin Sharma, and was there Chip Wilson. And after his speech, somebody asked him if he would go 20 years back in his business, what this decision he would make. And he told us that he would take 3 elder advisors, 3 old people to stand with him, to be there with his company, and to help him to not make so many mistakes, to advise him.
Mhm.
And I see here in this paragraph that Stacy read in 2 places that there are older people needed, angels needed, somebody who trusts somebody that leader trust. And I was thinking how this could be replicated in our society, in our companies, in our schools, in our organizations, to have this trust, this board composed by elders, trustees, scholars, and saints. And I think these are very, very important to guide the leader, to not feel alone sometimes.
Yes, definitely. As the saying goes, it sometimes can be lonely at the top, right? So I think for all of us who are leading in some capacity, if we don't have that infrastructure in place, I think it's a great take-home message for all of us to try to build in that infrastructure. Thank you. Ambika?
I think just hearing the discussion, something's come up for me, which is somewhat departing from authoritative leadership, where accountability is granted, and how we show up in our own respective communities and societies. And I vividly recall when we talk about divine leadership, or something that we were pulled for higher values. In my perhaps mid-20s, this very distinct inner conflict of I'm having alcohol on my social outings, and yet my mom's never touched that. And so which one's right? Do I be the good Indian girl like my mom, or the cool girl like everybody else in my generation currently is? And it almost felt unthinkable. Like you had to be consuming alcohol to be cool, to be going out. But there was always that inner conflict. Why was my mom the way she was, and why am I constantly pulled towards being that way? And yet it's in complete contrast to my current lifestyle. And then fast forward, I would say 15 years to just still a year or 2 ago, we were in California from London. We had gone there for a holiday, meeting cousins, and I was meeting people after a decade. And the last time I did meet them was before we had kids, and we were very much partying, going out clubbing and drinking. And so they meet me a decade later, and this is now when where alcohol's been out of our system for 5+ years. And I didn't have the vocabulary to communicate why I chose not to at that point, because initially pregnancy was the excuse, and then breastfeeding was the excuse. But at that point I was neither of those statuses held, and yet there was just a clear choice of I don't want to because of the spiritual path I'm on. And somehow I felt they didn't have I didn't have the language to communicate that to people who aren't on the path of spirituality. And yet once I fully got it for myself that I didn't need alcohol to lower my guard and show up to socialize, it was so freeing to just be able to communicate that. And I use that example because I felt it was such a disruption in social dynamics, and yet I had the freedom to be without diminishing other people's choices. And I think the more we give ourselves freedom to show up as our authentic true self, aligned with our core divine nature, it kind of gives others permission to do the same, where we don't just have to go with the flow because it's the norm. To your point that you made earlier, which is because majority are doing X, therefore does that make it right? And that example just came forth.
Thank you, Ambika. What a really powerful example that I'm sure many people, with whatever choice that they've had and how they translate it to the others. I'll just share something personal because I mean, in that regard, and it'll be interesting to see how you frame it. But for those that maybe I don't know so well, a lot of times I will just, because it's clearly, when you're in the healthcare profession, especially the medical profession, it's something that's pretty, something commonly that everyone does. And I usually speak to my yoga practice. And as we evolve or, want to advance in our yoga practice, there's certain lifestyle measures that are conducive to that. And this is one of them. So that's usually how, if I'm just talking to kind of the layperson, you don't want to go, you're not wanting to share all the details. That's a way that I convey it to others. And usually people, if they have any sort of, exercise type of practice, like for example, athletes, right? Athletes have a certain way of conducting themselves as they get closer, as they want to kind of increase their performance, right? So anyways, that was just a reflection based on something that you had shared from your experience. Palak?
Something Marius said, hopefully I'm pronouncing your name right, please let me know if I'm not. But something you said really kind of struck me because, about having the line about having elders to counsel and, for it to not be as lonely and to have kind of good counsel. And I thought about, the CEO on the board that I worked with. It was such a fear-based relationship. Like the entire C-suite team, they were just acting out of fear, like, oh, we can't do this because the board is, it won't reflect well. And I was just thinking about, when there are in fact structures to maintain kind of checks and balances, how that relationship is not, so much love-based. There's such little room for mistake. There's no nobody has your back. You're like, you're in trouble. You make a mistake, you're out. So it's I can appreciate that it's important to have people to counsel or elders, that board of elders, but it's also got to be like a bit of a safe space. That makes sense. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, it really does. Thank you, Palak. Any other comments or reflections on this section? All right. So we just wanted to read the first little section of I'll just refer to page 170 in the book, but for others, it's going to be this section on the power of austerity. That's the section in the book. And it's also in part 2 of servant leadership. So if you can see that section, and if people want to share their references, but this is connected to the first C. Building character is the title of the section, and just wanted to read the first part of that. It's a question and answer. Just let us know if anyone has found it, and if they would like to read the question and then the following answer. Page 95 for those that have the older book, and then it's following the section when leaders are too nice. So if that is ringing a bell. Does anyone want to read for us?
Hey, I'll read, Rick, because I'm gonna have to leave. My kids are getting up, so I'm
Sure,
gonna
go
get
ahead.
breakfast. So I'm gonna try to listen to the second half of these recordings.
Sure.
Okay. The power of austerity. Question. An interesting point about Vina is that he
Oh,
received the
sorry,
throne.
Stacy,
not it?
sorry, the section is after that. It's building
Oh.
character.
Okay. Oh, okay. There we go. Question. Aside from developing mystic opulences, austerity is character building. What means do our leaders have available to them in these times to build character? Answer. Character building is the most important priority in leadership. We can say that compassion and humility are the mothers of virtue, but character, competence, and courage are the fathers of virtue, particularly character. With character, one can get what money cannot buy. You can buy a bed, but not sleep. You can buy a book, but not brains. You can buy clothes, but not beauty. You can buy medicine, but not good health. You can buy a house, but not a home. You can buy people, but not friends. You can buy a temple, but not God. You can buy reputation, but not character. The most important things in life are earned by strong character and sacrifice. Externals like money are not enough. It takes genuine commitment and a development of higher consciousness. The dictionary defines character as the aggregate of features or traits that form the individual nature of a person or thing. Moral or ethical qualities of honesty, fortitude, etc., integrity.
We
The
can
crime
stop there.
rate. Oh, okay. Perfect.
It's
All
quite a
right.
long section.
Well, thank you all.
Thank you, Stacy. Any comments or reflections on just that first part? This is a really great section on the first C for anyone that wanted for us to go deeper into. If no one has any comments, I will just welcome Ed to the forum. Ed, how are you? Good morning, afternoon.
Good morning, afternoon. It's great to see all of you. I'm well. Thank you.
So if you want to take over, please do.
Okay, fantastic. So first of all, it was really enlivening to hear the discussions you were all having. So we wanted to take it further into our discussions from last week. So last week, and I'll share my slides in a moment, we were talking about the 4 C's. So this presentation was looking at this model of the 4 C's. And what we wanted to do is get into that in a little bit more detail today. What I'm going to do is just move this slightly. So we can do it like this. Okay, so hopefully that's better. Okay, so yes, we wanted to continue in our discussions on what we call the 4 C's of leadership. And what I wanted to do also is a few activities in this regard where we get you to think about these 4 C's in a bit more detail. Before we do that, what we wanted to do is just touch upon a couple of things, because the information is also coming from Bhishmadev. Actually, what I'll do is, as we did before, I'll do a quick invocation. We call this Mangalacharyan. I'll just do part of it. And it's to trigger, let's say, positivity and good fortune, and also a mindset which allows us to be open to empowerment, especially more refined, we sometimes say spiritual or transcendental understanding on this particular topic. So I'll just say that quickly, then we'll get in. Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shri Vasudeva Gaura Bhaktivinoda Hare Krishna Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Hare Rama Rama Rama. So before we get into our further communication around the 4 C's, I wanted to take a minute to just tell you a little bit about where this information is coming from. So this conversation in which we get these deep gems of leadership wisdom, which we're reading and discussing from Leadership for an Age of Higher Consciousness Part 2, they're considered to be one of the most powerful and significant conversations that have taken place in the Vedic literature. So it's from a literature called the Mahabharata. The Mahabharata in Sanskrit is called Itihasa. So the Sanskrit word has its own specific meaning. Iti ahasa, which translates as thus it happened. So itihasa means history. And in this narrative of the Mahabharata, which I guarantee you one day will be a Hollywood movie, because it's just so powerful in terms of the intrigues and up and downs of the particular narrative. At one point, so it's based around the dynamics between two families. One family called the Kauravas, the other is called the Pandavas, and they're related. But due to enmity or envy from the side of the Kauravas, the Pandavas have to undergo so many different trials and tribulations. And a key stage in this particular narrative is what is called the Battle of Kurukshetra, where the 5 Pandava brothers and their allied, associates, they were in a war against the Kauravas. Now, Bhishma Dev is considered to be one of what we call Raj Rishis. So in the ancient times of Vedic culture, which actually at one point, and there's a lot of evidence to support this, existed across the entire globe. At one point, with this culture existing across the entire globe, you had a class of leaders which were called saintly kings or Raj Rishis. So it's very interesting when we talk about character, because these great leaders were trained from a very young age in what we call the Gurukul, which is a traditional system of education. They were trained in exactly the point that Rikin and you were all discussing earlier. They were trained to practice austerity, to practice how to build character through not just learning knowledge and information, but they were trained in learning how to have strong character through serving elders, through showing respect to other people, through engaging in character development around truthfulness, cleanliness. All of these characteristics would invoke what we call, what we could say a sattvic mentality, the mode of goodness mentality. And as they were trained in this from a very young age, it allowed them to have these very strong patterns of behavior throughout their entire life. The other thing to note is this Raj Rishis, the term Raja means king, Rishi means sage. So they were trained to always consider and live in a way which was aligned with the truth, moral truths, ethical truths, and ultimately religious and spiritual truths as well. So Bhishma Dev was one of the great Raj Rishis. He was actually a senior person to the 5 Pandavas. So in this book of Leadership for an Age of Higher Consciousness 2, this conversation is where Bhishma Dev has actually been killed. He's been defeated, not killed, he's been defeated, and he's actually preparing to leave the world. But because he's such a great and powerful leader, but also such a great and powerful sage or mystic, he has the ability to choose or to control his own physical situation so he can have some control over when he passes away. So he's been asked at this particular point in the Mahabharata, he's actually preparing to leave the world, but he's been requested by Krishna to explain to Yudhisthira, who is one of the 5 Pandava brothers. He's explaining to Yudhisthira how to lead the entire world. So the conversation we're tuning into is an explanation of the basic and fundamental principles of leadership across the board. And they are being passed on by, he's sometimes called Grandfather Bhishma, okay? It's being passed by this very experienced and seasoned warrior to Yudhisthira, who's also a Raj Rishi, who's also a saintly king, but who's gonna come into the position of being emperor of the entire world. So at that time, you had emperors of the entire world, but within that, you'd have sub-leaders. So the emperor would then have other leaders in different regions who were under his ultimate leadership. And this was not the kind of leadership that we talk about now, where if there's a war, then the leader will stay in the White House or will stay, under a bunker somewhere, and then the soldiers will fight. When we talk about Raj Rishis, the deep essence of leadership within the Vedic times was that whenever you lead by example. So if the leader declares a war, he's fighting on the battlefield right in front of all the other soldiers, all the other generals. So this is a forgotten principle. And this is one of the reasons why we wanted to speak about this right at the beginning, because actually there's an archetype for leadership. And I'm not sure whether you may have read some of those sections in there, but one of the things that B.T. Swami will explain in the Leadership 2 book, and this is very, very powerful, by the way, and I'm actually doing some work on this at the moment, is that just as you have archetypes in different categories, even in the modern world, you have the archetypical mother, you have the archetypical father figure. And what they found in some aspects of depth psychology is that to the degree that a person moves away from that archetype, even when they are performing that particular role, to that degree, things can go awry. So in a similar way, the archetype of a leader is actually the Rajrishi. And it's a very, very deep dharmic archetype. Some people have even gone so far as to say that that archetype exists in a very, very deep way within what we call the collective unconscious. Okay, so Bhishma Dev and the Pandavas, they were incredibly aligned with that particular archetype. In fact, they were trained in that particular type of character, behavior, and it was a very interesting alignment. It's an alignment of knowledge and skills with mentality and training or culture. I'm going to repeat that because what we have in the modern society is usually one-dimensional. So there's the actual knowledge and skills of leadership with someone who has the nature of a leader, and also the training of a leader as well, to make sure that everything supports and reinforces itself. Okay, and this is a person who is sharing this information. So he has it by training, he has it also by experience. Now there's an interesting connection there too. What does experience do? Transparent experience. What it does is it provides nuance to realized or accurate knowledge. So if I understand exactly how to lead in terms of specific codes, best practices, when I then live that knowledge, I can then understand how that knowledge can be applied in a very sensitive way according to the time, place, and circumstance. So sometimes people have theoretical knowledge, but no experience. Sometimes people have experience, but because it's not based upon wisdom, they can come to the wrong conclusion from their experience. To give a very crude example, someone has a bad relationship, whether it's a man or a woman, and then their conclusion is the opposite sex are always trouble. Okay, that's not necessarily true. In fact, it's not true. But what's happening is they've allowed their bad experience to shape their entire paradigm. You see, they've been unable to separate the individual from the category that the individual can be aligned to. So they have a bad experience with one woman, and therefore, rather than understanding that there was a bad experience in this specific relationship, it now becomes, that's how all women are. Okay, or the opposite. Someone's had a bad experience with one man. Now, instead of it being that specific male individual, it becomes, okay, all men are like this. Okay, so that's why we need to have both. That's why we need to have the wisdom, which helps us to understand what is the principle, and then we need to apply that wisdom sensitively, which is called experience. And when we have those things together repeatedly, especially with good association, then we know what the right conclusions, we know what the right conclusions are to draw from the experiences that we have on a day-to-day or week-to-week, month-to-month, year-to-year basis. Okay, so that's just a little bit about Bhishma in terms of being a saintly king. We were talking last week about these 4 codes: courage, compassion, competence, and character. Okay, so we spoke about the first 2. Now I want to go to this one, and there's a few practical things I want you to do. Okay, so the third one, and this is something that many businesses are looking at consistently. The third one is competence. Now, in a sense, we've already begun the journey by considering that actually the competence has a lot to do with training, it has a lot to do with learning, etc. what I want to do is take this in a particular direction. The first thing I would like you all to do, and I'm going to ask you to do this in small groups, is I want you to discuss and put together through discussion, let's be realistic, let's say the beginnings of. I want you to put together the beginnings of a continuous development plan for you as a specific leader. Okay, I'll explain the context to this. When we train leaders, we train them and we train companies in having a culture of continuous development. It's not a seminar. It's not a book. It's not a one-off course. It's actually something much more profound than this, okay? It is a culture of continuous development as a leader and how that interfaces with the culture of the organization. So if you as a leader are continuously developing, if you're able to communicate your own investment as a leader to your firm, and if you're able to inspire your cohorts, your teams, your directs in that same way, you just multiply the effect of what you're doing. So I'm going to get you straight into a breakout activity, and I'm going to ask you to begin. I don't expect you to conclude, but I'm going to ask you to begin the blueprint for two things. One, what's the blueprint for my own continuous development? Okay, so we're now in August. Over the next year, what are some experiences that you can plug into? And think broadly, not just experiences in terms of workshops or seminars. I'm going to ask you to brainstorm in small groups. Brainstorm as many ideas as you can. How do I make competence a fundamental aspect of me as a leader? How do I make it an ongoing development for me as a leader? And how do I embed that in a firm? Okay, so that not only am I continually developing, but the entire company that I have responsibility for, the entire project that I have responsibility for, are always sharpening the saw, are always finding new ways and new means to learn new skills, learn new competence, learn new, let's say, mindsets as well. So skills, competence, mindsets, and how do I create a culture where they are always bringing that back to the team and sharing that with other people? Okay, I'm going to ask you to brainstorm that, and then I'm going to ask you to come back and share some of your ideas and also some of the beginnings of your own personal plan with your peers in this particular class. Before I start the activity, are there any questions or comments on this? Okay, I'm going to stop my screen.
I've created the breakout rooms.
Okay, fantastic. So what we're going to do is we're going to negotiate. Again, I'm not expecting you to complete the plan. I want you to begin the journey, okay? But before we begin the journey, the one last thing I'm going to ask you is, what's in it for you? Okay, before we send anyone anywhere, if you are able to do this, and this is applicable to all of us, I want you to imagine, I want you to think forward. If each and every one of us have a committed plan of continuous development and are able to inspire our organizations in a committed culture of continuous development, what is the potential gain? Anyone, just unmute and share with me. If we're able to do this, what's the potential gain? Okay, Ronnie, I hear your point. I know you have to leave soon. Thank you for letting us know. I'd like to hear from someone before we go into the breakouts though. What's the potential gain to you and your organization if we can start to develop a culture of continuous development as a leader and as an organization?
Ed, I would say the potential gain for myself and the organization is collaboration over competition. But not just collaboration for the sake of working together, but collaboration working towards higher consciousness and therefore productivity, profitability, consciousness, everything is on the rise.
Absolutely. Now, just think about this point. So BT Swami, and I believe we mentioned it last week, he told one person who was late for a meeting, said, that meeting that you're late for, if there's 10 people in the meeting, that 5 minutes delay, multiply that by the number of people that you're trying to serve and consider that that's how much time you've wasted. When we consult with organizations, one of the first things I do is look at the culture. And then I'll speak to the leader, and the leader will inevitably tell me, yes, I'm investing in myself as a leader. And I always notice in 9 cases out of 10, that they don't have a culture of that. They're doing it silo. It's a siloed leadership development. They've not been able to inspire the culture. And now think about that. And sometimes the leader has 100 people that he or she is working for. And I'm having to point out to them, what you don't understand is if you got everyone in the team to invest in their development like you did, you have just multiplied the productivity of your organization 100 times, right? You're doing it one time as a leader. That's suboptimal. It should be embedded in the company. Will I often advise, and I'm going to advise you if you're not doing this already, to make sure that your teams and the people that you lead also have performance development goals around their own development. And also performance development goals, not just around their own development, but about how they cascade everything that they go away and learn back to everyone else. Okay, I call it the amplifier effect. So you have 100 people, they're all reading out in their spare time, they're going on courses in their spare time, they're learning new skills and mindsets in their spare time, and they come back to the company and say, look, I learned this, I want to share this with the team. I've discovered this, I want to share this with the team. I found this new way to generate innovation. I want to share this with the team. So actually it's a synergistic effect, okay? And I find that 9 companies out of 10, it's a missed opportunity. It's a blind spot that we're not using, that we're not investing in. So however many people there are on your team, I want to make sure you get maximum amplifying value. So again, we're going to start the breakout activities. We're going to bring you back. We're not expecting you to completely conclude. I want you to begin the journey for yourself and your teams. How do I create the culture where everyone goes away, learns, grows, and brings back the learning to everyone's benefit? Okay, so Ricken, you've actually created the breakout rooms already. Let us say 10 minutes to begin the journey. And then after 10 minutes, we're going to bring you back. And we just want to hear your initial brainstorming ideas. And we also want to hear anything that you may be doing already around your own continuous development. And if you have it embedded in your company, what are some of the things or best practices in the continuous development that you have within your organization at present, if it's there? Any questions before we send you to the breakout room? Okay, Ricken, if you could start the breakout activities, we'll see you back here 10 minutes time. Please make notes to share. I believe everyone's back. I believe everyone's back in the main room. Now, look, I'm genuinely interested in what you've been discussing, okay? That culture of continuous development and also how we embed that within organizations, projects, or teams. And by the way, I just wanted to say also, I don't believe we met before, Toro. It's a pleasure to have you on the call. So thank you so much for joining. Really appreciate it. I'm just going to ask you to unmute and feel free to share what did you talk about?
Maurice, should we go? Should we start?
Yes.
We're such a great team. Maurice and I speak once a week. We actually do speak once a week, and it's like, I can't believe we're in the same room. We didn't get anyone new. So Maurice had a lot of great examples and great thoughts because he's running an organization, and we've
Ada, your screen is frozen. Ada, are you there? Okay,
I'm hearing you. Can you hear me?
I can hear you, Maurice, but we can't hear
I'm in
Ada.
a village and I have a poor connection. Excuse me, if I start my camera, the connection goes off.
It's please.
So until Aida connects, I will tell you the resume of our meeting. I was thinking that in the company I have, or in any organization, you should share the competence and the skills you have as a leader to your team, and your team should share the same in their department, the competence they have. And Aida asked me, how would you do this? How would you implement this in your company? And I said that by example, by doing it myself, and by consistency, by doing weekly. If I learned a lot in the last 10 years, the 5 years, and I know a lot of things about leadership, about business, about the company I'm running. And I realized when Ed told us that I didn't share it enough with my company, with my team in my company. And I think sharing, it's a culture of sharing in the company. It's a great way to build and to develop the people in the company. And this kind of sharing, I think, should be done systematically, at least in my company. And I listened in the podcast in the past, a methodology to do it, to make 1 hour of learning every week. And as a way forward to implement what we are speaking here, I'm thinking to make, I will make 1 hour training every week with my team. And then after a few meetings, I will encourage them to do in every department 1 hour of learning with the team and with each team. And I think that this will not work without consistency and without my own example. And then we spoke about an analogy with Aida about the way parents teach kids in the family, and how are they doing it. And they are doing it with love, and they are doing it consistently, and sometimes they are doing it also when kids don't want to learn. They find ways to interact with them and to implement some routines, some family values, even when the kids don't like them. And they are doing it usually with love. And this is the way the leader in an organization can build competence and skills in my way and Aida way of thinking.
Thank you very much for sharing that. And I just want to also touch upon one more thing before we get before we take it further, because I want us to hear from more people. Increasingly, what we're seeing is that organizations that have that culture of continuous learning and development, they're able to retain talent for longer. Okay, so it's also a retention strategy. And I can see Avni, you're nodding. So Avni, I'm going to go straight to you. Why would implementing this on a cultural organizational level, why would it increase the likelihood that we as leaders are able to not only attract talented people to our projects, but also keep talented people within our projects? Avni.
So no, thank you so much, Ed. In fact, before this actual exercise, I was writing down the fact that when you encourage people to learn, it increases that positive energy within the environment of the corporate, and it creates that momentum towards where you want to go. Mm-hmm. It avoids the tendency for conflict, and people generally like amazing positive environments. It allows people to have tools to deal with not only issues they might face within the company, but also apply it at home. a lot of people come into their work environment burdened with so much. And so people like it, that to be able to apply in their 360 world. And it's it's just such an amazing environment to be in, that growth orientated environment. And it's even, I mean, I love what Morris said, and also Ida said, the fact that we have to be, as leaders, showing up as role models and consistently, because people are watching without you even knowing, especially children, or my coaching clients. They're watching 24/7. And I think it was Ricken who said, who said it? Or is it the book we said last time? Oh, no, it's on the, on Ricken, what was it? Upbuild, whereby they say that it's the activity that you do and the person that you are when nobody is watching. You have to be that even in that environment, which I know that I'm not.
Well, we're all on that journey, Avni. So let's frame that very, very positively. First of all, it's great to see you, Palak, as well. I want to hear your point, but I'll also just add to what Avni is saying, because Avni, when you were speaking, it also sparked something else. So Google, for example, Google, at least in some areas of their business, they will give their staff a certain amount of money per year. And they'll tell their staff, you can use that either for, you can go out and go on whatever training your courses will, a certain amount of money there. You can use that for training. You just bring that back and just share with the team what you've learned. So what's interesting is now, it's not just a question of attracting and retaining talent, but there's also something about brand augmentation. Think about your brand in whichever industry you're working in, and you can show people, we invest in our people. When you join us, you're going to learn new skills constantly, not just one thing. You'll come out with a whole range of additional competencies. And I'm pushing managers all the time. I'm always telling managers, when you hire people, when you're recruiting, I want you to make sure that even if you don't hire them, they know about all the great learning and growth opportunities within your firm. So there's a lot that we can do in this space. Palak, over to you.
Oh, thank you for sharing that. Ashley, to your point, and then to Avni and Marius, I saw this firsthand. My old leader, there was a lot of kind of discontent, and everyone within the company felt like, it was very siloed. Nobody knew what was going on in the other function. Everyone seemed overburdened, and then the leader was like, okay, let's start sharing what everyone's doing, even if it's passion projects or anything like that. And everyone first was not very happy with the idea because it's an additional meeting on a Friday. And eventually, and there were a lot of people that were very disengaged and kind of disenfranchised, but there was a lot more camaraderie within the team a few weeks later. And we also know that we were able to keep people that, were on their way out, because they just felt like they knew what was going on. They were part of the fabric of the corporation. So it was just interesting to remember that.
Thank you so much. And that's really powerful, because the research talks about this, a great resignation. People are increasingly leaving jobs because they don't feel valued, they don't feel appreciated. One of the easiest ways to make people feel valued is to have them share something that is valuable and then see everyone else appreciate what they're sharing. Isn't that incredible? Right? So you go away and learn things, and we've got dedicated time, to Marius's point, which I think is a brilliant point. We've got dedicated time where we're going to share. You're sharing something, so now you're contributing to my own personal and professional life, because I love the point that was made. It's not demarked. Often these skills have transfers in many different areas. I'm now going to ask you more questions. How does this work? That's interesting. How have you used it? And then you're going to give me even more insight. So you're adding value practically to your team in a very tangible way on a regular basis. And also, to your point, Palak, it builds tremendous bonds. What's happening, to be honest, right now, and this is another thing for all of you, because of social media and because of technology, people's ability to pay attention has gone down. So what it does on a subtle level, at the level of the mind, is people are more, they're more conditioned to having to have new experiences regularly, which is why you don't see people staying in the same role for 10 years now. After 2-3 years, they're bored and they want something different. So what they found on a cognitive psychology level is that if there's constant learning and development, it keeps a sense of dynamism and a sense of freshness to people's experience in the workplace. So because the workplace feels dynamic and fresh, because we're always learning new things, trying new things, hearing new things, therefore people are much more ready to stay in that company, as opposed to people who feel, you know what, I'm bored here, I don't think I'm growing, and now I'm going to go somewhere else, even though the grass is not necessarily greener on the other side. So this is also playing into what we call the retention strategy of an organization. And if you brand that, if you can put that into the marketplace, if you join us, we focus on your development, you will see that oftentimes you stand above the opposition, because many companies, they don't do it. And the companies that do it, few, they don't even let people know that they do it. They're not good at promoting it. So there's always two things. There's always the brand proposition and the brand communication. You may have certain things that you do in your company which are brilliant, but if no one knows about it, you won't stand out. So it's what you do and how you communicate to the marketplace that this is available in your organization that makes a huge difference. I'm so excited to hear more. Who else would like to share? Just unmute and feel free. Yes, Avantika.
So two amazing ladies, Toral and Vibhu and I, we had a lovely, so we didn't really get down into what the learning strategies would be. We started off by, taking it very seriously about what the blueprint should be for our continuous development. And something which actually came in, the little later, but I want to start with that. Vibhu made a beautiful point about, what B.D. Swami also says in the book she read, that you've got to start with, that divine purpose for why there is the servant leadership in the first place. So the big why or the purpose is really what should come up front. And then we focus a little bit about the framework that we'd like to focus with, because it's very important to understand the ecosystem that you're operating out of. So we went around the table and we tried to understand, what is my ecosystem, Toral's ecosystems, and Vibhu's ecosystem. And one thing in common we realize is that all of us at this point are creating bridges between parallel ecosystems. So one in the personal and one in the professional, and there's scope for leadership in both. So that was one of the areas that we want to focus on. And then in terms of, going further down the blueprint, the framework was understanding who our stakeholders are. So who is it that we're serving? And we wanted to put it in 4 buckets. The first stakeholder being myself. I need to nurture my skills, my learning, my authenticity. The second being the clients, the customers. Who are the customers in each? So, for instance, if it's Toral, it could be her parents that she's currently, serving. For Vibhu, it could be her clients in her law practice. It could also be, she's doing some collaborative work with John's team, so it could be her peers there. For me, it could be, what it is. And the third is the community as a big piece of how this kind of adds value to the communities we're part of at large. And the last one is, the businesses or the organizations that we're running. So what is our accountability for profitability and resources and managing, all of that. So that's the framework we started off with. And it's great to kind of go down this road and figure out what emerges out of this framework into the real blueprint for our learning. So even before we started with what are the skills we're going to learn, we wanted to understand, the big why, our ecosystem, and who our stakeholders are that we are servicing. So that's really where we kind of, and feel free to add and chip in, Vibhu and Toral.
Vibhu, what did you want to share something, to add something? You don't have to, just ask. Okay.
No, I just wanted to share, as Avantika said, I'm often thinking about the why, because sometimes things can seem so purposeless and meaningless. And the way I think of it is, as B.G. Swami, like we're all stewards of what is in front of us, and that if something is in front of me, it's in my care and for me to do the best I can. And why it is in front of me is because karmically or for whatever reason, this is what is manifested. So instead of like wanting something else, to just do like be with it with care and a sense of stewardship and trusteeship.
Absolutely. And to be honest, there's an exercise I wanted to do because we want to look a little bit at purposeful teams along with different types. So we'll come back to that maybe next week because I'm conscious of the time. So I guess I'll just ask if there are any other comments on this particular activity before we close. I know that we are at time for quite some people on the call. Ada.
And what do you think? Thank you. What do you think about, of course, in the context of leadership? I mean, we've spoken about, because I loved when you said to bring the two things of wisdom and experience together.
Yes.
Yeah. And the Rajarshi, I don't know if I pronounced that right, to lead by example is to get on the battleground. Like it's obvious. It's an obvious thing you are doing. Yeah. So the action is obvious. Then there is the speech, the talking, that's obvious. But what about in silence being a leader?
Yes. Important. Yeah. Please.
So what comes to mind is with one client, the culture's not that great, and only today a young lady resigned because she was not getting the development.
Yeah, exactly.
Only today. But my experience in that organization in the last month or so is I noticed that when I was, talking, I wasn't listened so much because there was such an embedded culture. And so I thought I'd try a different approach. And that was by doing, but not in talking, but by being, because Marissa also spoke about consistency, is being that way, doing that way consistently. And so I noticed their conversation with me changed. And I noticed they said, oh, I noticed, Ada, that you did that. I noticed, Ada, when you did that, you also said that, but I didn't actually go into that intentional, obvious conversation about it. Does that?
It makes complete sense. And B.T. Swami will speak about that also, and we'll come to that. He talks about the leader is first of all to be, and then to say and do, etc. And this is one of the real reasons why this Leadership for an Age of Higher Consciousness Part 2 book is outstanding, because it brings in that subtle dimension. Actually, everything is rooted in our being. You'll see that there are many people, even when they just come into the room, they don't say a word, but their presence does so much. And that's actually the highest level of leadership, where they sometimes talk about divine connection, higher consciousness, etc., where what you are is so powerful that it actually has an impact upon the environment. And so you'll see that many leaders now are engaging in meditation and engaging in mantra meditation, engaging in internal introspective activities, because they know that by working on themselves, they're able to impact upon others. I know there's more than one company that do this. There are some companies where when you work for them, they also make sure that you have access to therapists, counselors, all these people, just so you can continue to work on yourself as an individual, so that you bring a greater sense of being to the environment. So please do not underestimate the power of that. It's an absolutely essential point. And I will predict the future of great leadership and great companies, there will come a time where that will be standard practice, where people will work for these top tier organizations, and as part of it, self-development, personal development will not be a side point. It will be inherent through the DNA of the entire organization. That will come. Maybe one day we'll work on some companies like that in the future as well. It'll be an interesting and revolutionary new level. And think about that. I'm just planting a seed now, because you'll see that many young people, they want that. And unfortunately, many young people, we all know there's a huge mental health, increasing mental health challenges in the world. There are many people of the younger generation, they would be particularly interested in working for an organization where, along with the professional development, side by side and interrelated, there's an inherent culture of personal unfolding as well. Think about that as a revolutionary business idea. Business and spirituality naturally intertwined at an organizational or cultural level. So you come in and whatever patterns we have, good or bad, they don't just play out through our interactions with people, but they are actually, but there's facility by being part of that company to work on your own personal issues as part of the company culture. That could be extremely revolutionary and extremely powerful, right? Think about that. I'm always into innovative new ideas and new ways of doing business. I'm just throwing that out for all of you. I'm conscious that we are at time. I don't want to leave it to the point where people have to leave and then they miss out on the conversations. I had a lot more that I wanted to get into.
Oh, don't finish. We've just started.
There's a lot more, but what I do appreciate is what we're doing. Let's be very clear. What we're doing here is about quality. I want to, and this is why this conversation is so powerful. I'm going to set you this homework. I want you to begin this journey, this culture of continuous development. When we come next week, I want you to all have the beginnings of your own personal continuous development plan. And I want you to all have one thing that you've implemented or shared to begin the journey of making that part of your organizational project or team culture. Okay. So again, when we come back next week, you're going to have with you the beginnings of your own personal continuous development plan for the next year. Okay. How are you going to, where are you going to focus? What are some competencies that you're going to learn? How are you going to, whether it's books, reading, how are you going to be learning that? How are you going to be going on that journey for the next year? It doesn't have to be complete, but I want you to have something that you can share. And what's the first step in implementing a continuous culture of learning and development with the people that you're leading? Okay, that's the homework. We began the discussions now, but I want you to put together something a bit more together that you can share next week. Okay, so this 4 C's was meant to be one session. We started the journey last week. We've continued the journey today, and it's going to be another session next week. Anyway, that's okay because I like quality. So we hope you found this, we hope you found it useful, and we want you to apply this. And I'm very excited to see how you can amplify that development and learning culture, amplify the brand, because now people can know what we do in this company, how we help you to grow, how we help each other to grow. I love the point that Palak made, the retention strategy around if everyone's sharing, now I'm valuing each other, we're valuing each other for something that's really interesting. They've actually gone on a course, they've learned something that I actually find useful. So when they're speaking, I'm not pretending. I genuinely value what they're sharing. It's helping me to grow. I'm learning new things, and it's a continuous culture in that particular respect. Okay, so we'll stop there. Thank you so much for your time. I'm always excited to be with you, to learn with you, to grow with you. And we look forward to discussing more in the next session. Thank you.
Thank you, Ed.
everyone.
Another amazing session.
Thank you.
Bye.
So
Thank you.
Thank
Torla, it was really nice to
Thanks,
see
Ed
you
and Ricken.
tuning in from New York again.
you, Ricken.
Thank you, Tom.
Great to see
Bye,
everybody
ciao.
too.
It's nice to meet you. Thank you, everyone.
Have fun in Spain, Maurice.
Thank you.
Relax.
Bye. Ciao.
Here,
Bye.
everyone.
Ciao.
Ed, do you have a minute? I just had a personal question about
Absolutely.
Bhishma.
Absolutely, please, yeah.
Yeah, I didn't want to bring this up in the main thing, but this is actually quite similar to a lot of conversations that the younger generations are having right now about some of the role models that they're finding in positions of power and authority, usually from the older generations. And these words which have come up, toxic masculinity and patriarchy, they're pretty, like which when I entered the workforce 20 years ago, it was not that common, but now it's pretty much part of the culture. But, with Bhishma, here's about the character. Just on the one hand, we have this character who exemplifies celibacy, austerity, hermit, this thing, and also courage and competence and all of that. That's amazing, but very difficult to kind of, overlook 2 very vital facts. One, that he chose the wrong side to support.
Absolutely, absolutely.
The second that, even in his youth, it was all about, kind of like his abduction of those 3 princesses, and bring them back. So at some point, I think that, character needs to be, it's like, I think in Julius Caesar, Caesar's wife must be above suspicion. So at some point, it's difficult for many people of the newer generations to identify with sources of wisdom, however amazing and competent and this thing they are, if there is this underlying thread of, toxicity. So I just, the quandary that I have is dedicating 12 weeks of study to the work, the messages and the wisdom and the knowledge, which I know I can derive a lot of because there's a lot there. But how does one, because one always enters into these arenas and there is always, the baby and the bath water, and you don't want to throw both of them out. So what are your thoughts on this, and how would you guide someone who has this quandary?
This is, I'm so glad you asked this question. So when I first came across these teachings, I had exactly the same question. And to be honest, there's even more than that. So when Draupadi was being disrobed, which would be bad even in the modern time, but in that time, it was even more outrageous. Bhishma Dev, as an elder, it was his responsibility. It's the responsibility of the elders to actually have protected her, because she was a chaste woman and she should never have been allowed to be humiliated in that way. Ultimately, and you'll know from Mahabharata, Krishna provided her unlimited sorry so that disgrace did not happen. But there's so many explanations given by the acharyas in the Vedic knowledge. So some acharyas have explained that first of all, because Draupadi, being a chaste lady, was being insulted and Bhishma Dev didn't protect her, that's given us one of the reasons why on the battlefield of Kurukshetra, he was gonna have to die. That was a reaction to him not performing his duty properly in that regard. That's the first point. Second, in terms of Bhishma Dev taking the wrong side, absolutely. He sided with the Kauravas, even though he had great love and appreciation and respect for the Pandavas. Now, there's a few nuances to this. So first of all, we learn that before the Battle of Kurukshetra, Yudhisthira and Arjun, they went to the Kaurava side. And they spoke to Bhishma Dev and Dronacharya in particular as their seniors, and also we know Dronacharya was actually the trainer of the Pandavas, you see? And they actually, they did two things. They asked for permission to fight against them, right? Because there was such a culture of respect. And they said, look, we can't defeat you. You're our seniors. In fact, you're the people who trained us. How will we defeat you? And the culture was of such an elevated level that the leaders said, we appreciate the fact that you've shown so much respect. And Bhishma Dev and Dronacharya, they actually gave them advice on how they could be defeated as well. So that's another factor. Now, there's another dimension, which is more of a spiritual dimension. It is explained by the acharyas that the act of Bhishma Dev taking the wrong side, one explanation externally is because he had taken grains from the house of the Kauravas. So it had affected his consciousness and therefore his judgment. That's an external reason. But the higher reason is that Krishna wanted to use Bhishma Dev, who's technically, he's what's called a Mahajan. He's one of the 12 authorities on religion. So it said that, so on a highest level, he could not have done something wrong by his own volition, but he was being utilized for a higher purpose. And that was to show the world that if you take the wrong side, no matter how elevated you are, you must ultimately meet with some kind of failure. So therefore, Bhishma Dev is simultaneously looked up to, but we recognize when we look at the fine detail that there were certain external mistakes which were made. But we could say that this was what we call Leela. You know that term, obviously. It was done to teach the world a higher lesson, but it's not that he himself was just a mundane, misguided individual. Okay, his actions being completely surrendered to the supreme will, he was used to indicate to the world certain lessons, but it's not that he himself became, let's say, just externally misguided in the way that a materialistic person would.
That makes a lot of sense. That really does make a lot of sense. And I would argue that it's similar to what I've been speaking about Adolf Hitler, very, very different people, but also someone who was very austere and had a lot of, in his own things. And one of the purposes or the tools that, he objectified himself as becoming such an object of hate for generations and the world, is because it was through him as a tool that all the systemic racism, which was under the skin and under the surface, came to light, and there was an opportunity to be cleansed.
Yeah,
So
yeah. Right.
in some ways, I guess I think that attitude I can live with. That's a good way to look at Bhishma as being
I
someone.
just want to make a distinction though between Hitler and Bhishma, because with Bhishma, because of his exalted position and consciousness, any mistakes that he made were not out of any kind of malice or ill intention. He was being utilized by Krishna to actually indicate something to the world. The difference with Hitler is that his whole purpose behind those atrocities was actually from a very, very dark place. So that's where we make a very, very clear distinction. And as a result, someone who orchestrated the mass killing of so many people on the basis of race, which is exactly as you mentioned, not only did they bring to the world's awareness the cruelty of man's inhumanity to others on an external basis, but that person, Hitler, he would have to suffer very intense negative karmic repercussions, not just in one life, but over many, many lives for such negative behavior as well. So that's where we would really highlight the key distinctions in that sense. Yeah, but thank you for making that comment.
All right. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Avantika. Avantika, just, to Ed's point, a lot of the characters that we see, for example, both in the Mahabharata and the Ramayana, we have to look at their internal purpose and the external, external manifestation. And I think most people who haven't maybe kind of delved a little bit deeper, they look at everything on very much an external platform. But if we look at Bhishma Dev's internal, his internal consciousness and his internal way of being, they're two very different things. And the characteristic of most great individuals is that there's some degree of misunderstanding from an external platform.
Great point.
Got
Great point.
Got it. Hey, thank you so much, guys. I appreciate it. I'll let you have it. Thanks. Bye.
Thank you.
Thanks, Avantika.